Undercover boss orders vehicle service at his wash center. He freezes, hearing an elderly worker cry. What happens when a CEO brings his own car to one of his car wash centers and uncovers the truth hidden behind smiling faces? Ethan Cole, the founder and CEO of EcoWash, had spent over a decade building his brand from the ground up. He prided himself on creating a business where employees felt valued and customers were treated like family. But lately, things had started to fall apart. Customer complaints were piling up. Dirty cars, rushed jobs, rude staff, and employee turnover had hit an all-time high. Regional managers assured Ethan that everything was fine. The reports on his desk painted a rosy picture, but the whispers he heard, the ones that never made it into the spreadsheets, told a different story. Frustrated and determined to find out the truth for himself, Ethan decided to go undercover. He picked a location far from headquarters, the EcoWash Brookstone Center, 2 hours away by car, just far enough that no one would recognize him. What he discovered would shake him to the core, and by the time he left, the future of his company and the lives of the people working for him would never be the same. The sun was high when Ethan pulled into the cracked parking lot of the EcoWash Brookstone Center. His old sedan rattled into a spot near the edge, the paint sun-bleached and tired, just like everything else around here. It was hotter than he expected, the kind of heat that made the pavement shimmer and the machines groan under the strain. He stepped out, adjusting the worn cap lower over his forehead, and moved slowly toward the entrance. No one greeted him. No smiles, no eye contact, just the dull buzz of hoses and the mechanical whir of aging car wash equipment. Inside, he watched. The place looked nothing like the vision he had built years ago, not the fresh, bustling centers he had once imagined. The air smelled of wet rubber and chemical soap, the kind that clung to your clothes. The floor was slick, the chairs in the waiting area were cracked, and the TV mounted to the wall flickered a grainy soap opera no one was watching. He spotted her almost immediately. Olivia, a woman, probably late 50s, maybe early 60s, small-framed but wiry, her gray hair tucked under a fraying cap. She moved slowly, methodically, scrubbing at the side of a truck twice her size. She looked small next to it, her arms trembling slightly under the strain. Gray hair poked from beneath a fraying cap, and her uniform hung loose on her frame, like it belonged to someone much younger, much stronger. Then the voice came, sharp, cutting through the heavy air. "Move it, Olivia! You're falling behind again!" Troy, the manager, mid-30s, heavy-set, arms crossed like a king surveying peasants. His tone wasn't frustrated, it was contempt. Olivia flinched but didn't say a word. She bent her head lower and scrubbed harder, her knees almost buckling as she shifted the heavy hose. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. He forced himself to keep watching. Nearby, a young worker, Liam, according to his name tag, shot Olivia a glance, one filled with helplessness. He moved to help, quietly taking the heavier tasks without being asked. Troy didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. Minutes dragged by. Customers trickled in and out, complaining quietly amongst themselves. Cars left, still streaked with soap in the corners, windows spotted, mirrors untouched. Nobody said anything out loud, just the heavy sighs, the muttered comments, the looks of disappointment. It was a slow, rotting failure. Not loud, not explosive, just decay, day by day, minute by minute. When Olivia finally stumbled toward the tiny break room, Ethan followed from a distance, careful not to draw attention. He lingered by the vending machines, pretending to read the cracked selection labels. Through the open door, he heard it, soft at first, then breaking. Olivia's quiet, choked sobs. She was sitting on a plastic chair, head bowed, wringing her hands. A water bottle sat untouched beside her, condensation pooling at its base. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't just a bad day. This was the weight of 100 bad days, crushed into tired bones and worn down hope. He couldn't stand back anymore. Stepping lightly, he tapped on the door frame. Olivia startled, swiping at her eyes quickly. "Sorry to bother you," Ethan said gently, keeping his voice low, careful. "I'm new around here. Just trying to figure out how things work." Olivia sniffed, embarrassed, but managed a shaky smile. "Just keep your head down and move fast," she said hoarsely. "That's about it." He pulled up a chair, sat down at an angle, non-threatening, casual. "Seems like you've been here a while," he said, tilting his head. "Almost 2 years," she answered. Her voice was rough, worn thin from long shifts and longer disappointments. "Longer than most?" He nodded slowly. "You always get the hardest jobs?" A shadow passed over her face. "If you're older, you don't get to pick," she said simply. "Just lucky to still have a job, I guess." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a quiet resignation, the kind that cuts deeper than anger. Outside, Troy's voice barked again, calling for another car to be pulled in. Ethan stayed still. "You shouldn't have to be lucky to be treated fairly," he said softly. Olivia looked at him then, really looked, her eyes tired, suspicious. But maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope flickering beneath the exhaustion. It was enough. Ethan stood, giving her space, offering a small, genuine nod. "I'll see you out there," he said, and he meant it. He wasn't just going to see her. He was going to see everything, and he wasn't going to leave it broken. Not this time. Ethan slipped back into the flow of the center, blending once again into the noise and chaos. Olivia returned to the line a few minutes later, face composed, smile faint but determined. He watched as she picked up another heavy bucket, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. No one else seemed to. The afternoon dragged on, the sun burning hotter against the cracked concrete. Machines sputtered, hoses tangled and leaked. Customers shifted impatiently in plastic chairs, their arms crossed, their faces sour. The complaints started small. A man in a business suit frowned as he inspected his car, running a finger through a thick layer of dust still clinging to the bumper. He shook his head, muttering under his breath. A young mother snapped at a worker, pointing at the fingerprints still smudging her back window. No one shouted. Not yet. But the tension was thick, heavy, almost sticky in the heat. Ethan caught Liam wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, rushing to help Olivia scrub the stubborn stains off an old sedan. Liam worked fast, faster than he should have, and Ethan saw it, the slight stagger in the boy's step, the way his chest heaved from exhaustion. Across the lot, Troy barked orders without lifting a finger. He paced back and forth like a restless dog, throwing clipped commands at the crew, tossing blame like confetti. "Move faster!" "No excuses." "You call that clean? Don't make me babysit you." Every word landed like a slap. Every glance tightened the coil of shame around his workers' necks. Ethan made mental notes, each one carving a deeper line into his growing sense of outrage. This wasn't mismanagement. This was cruelty, disguised as leadership. It got worse. An elderly man, probably in his 70s, shuffled toward the waiting area, leaning heavily on a cane. His car, a battered pickup, had been pulled aside, clearly not finished yet. He stood there, blinking under the bright sun, confused. Olivia saw him first. Despite the other cars piling up, despite Troy's voice ringing in her ears, she set down her hose and walked over to him, offering a soft word and a steady hand to guide him to a seat. That's when it happened. Troy stormed across the lot, face flushed with anger, sweat staining his shirt. "What are you doing?" he barked at Olivia, loud enough for half the center to hear. "You don't have time to babysit customers. Get back to work." Olivia froze, one hand still lightly resting on the old man's shoulder. Her lips parted, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, but no words came out. The old man looked up, startled, shrinking into his chair. For a long moment, nobody moved. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Ethan felt it in his bones, the injustice of it, the smallness of the moment, the way it crushed something sacred under the boot of urgency. And in that silence, something inside him shifted. He didn't need another hour. He didn't need another hidden conversation. He had seen enough. Pushing off the wall where he had been leaning, Ethan moved. Deliberate. Steady. He crossed the lot without hurrying, without hesitating, stopping just a few feet from Troy. "You think yelling makes you a leader?" Ethan asked quietly, but his voice cut through the heat like a blade. Troy spun around, surprised, already gearing up for a fight. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he snapped. Ethan reached into his back pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and flipped it open just enough to show the EcoWash executive badge inside. "My name," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, "is Ethan Cole. And this is my company." The blood drained from Troy's face so fast it was almost comical. Around them, the crew froze. Liam dropped the rag he was holding. Even Olivia stared, stunned, one hand still clutching the hem of her shirt. The old man in the chair looked from Ethan to Troy and back again, his eyes wide with silent hope. Ethan held Troy's gaze a moment longer, then shifted his attention back to Olivia, giving her the smallest, surest nod. The balance of power had shifted. The game was no longer in Troy's hands, and for the first time all afternoon, the air felt a little lighter. The silence in the lot was deafening. Troy shifted his weight, chest puffing up in a poor attempt to recover some shred of control. But it was too late. Everyone had seen. Everyone had heard. "You don't understand," Troy stammered, voice cracking just slightly. "We're short-staffed. People don't want to work hard anymore." Ethan cut him off with a look. One cold, unblinking look that pinned Troy in place better than any shouted order could. "I understand perfectly," Ethan said, his tone even, unshakable. "I understand exactly what's been happening here." He stepped closer, close enough that Troy had to tilt his head back slightly to meet his eyes. "I saw how you treated Olivia," Ethan said, his voice dropping lower, sharper. "I saw how you barked at a 70-year-old man just for needing a hand." He let the words hang there, heavy, undeniable. "And I saw how you poisoned the team you were supposed to lead." Troy opened his mouth again, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but Ethan didn't give him the chance. "You're finished here," Ethan said, loud enough that the entire center could hear. "Effective immediately." For a second, it looked like Troy might push back, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw working furiously. But whatever defiance he might have summoned drained away as he looked around and realized no one was standing with him. Not Liam, not Olivia, not anyone. He was alone. Slowly, Troy peeled off his name tag, his hand trembling slightly, and dropped it onto the ground at Ethan's feet. The plastic cracked when it hit the concrete. Without another word, he turned and stalked off toward the back office, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. No one moved for a long moment. Then, a subtle shift. Olivia straightened her shoulders, just a fraction. Liam let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Even the customers, still lingering by their half-finished cars, seemed to sense that something had changed. Ethan turned slowly to face them, his team, his responsibility, and spoke, not with the booming authority of a boss, but with something deeper. "Nobody should be afraid to come to work," he said. "Nobody should be made to feel small for doing their best." He looked around, catching the eye of each person in turn. "We're better than this," he said quietly. "And starting today, starting right now, we're going to prove it." He didn't promise miracles. He didn't make empty speeches about turning a new leaf or corporate visions. He just stood there, solid and real, offering something far more powerful, a choice, a chance, a way forward. The crew began to move again, slowly at first, like thawing ice. But there was something different in the way they lifted hoses, checked the finished cars, and greeted the next customer. Hope, fragile but growing, wove itself back into the cracks. Ethan caught Olivia's eye one more time. She gave him the smallest nod, barely there. But it was enough. It was everything. And inside Ethan's chest, for the first time in what felt like a long time, something steady and right clicked back into place. The road ahead would be long. There would be more wrongs to right, more damage to undo. But today, at least, they had taken the first step. And that, Ethan thought as he turned toward the office, was how real change always begins. Not with grand speeches or sweeping declarations, but with one person refusing to look away. The door to the office clicked softly behind Ethan as he stepped inside. It was small, cramped, littered with paperwork Troy had long given up organizing. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old coffee and frustration. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, letting the silence settle over him. This place had been broken long before today. But not anymore. Not if he had anything to say about it. He gathered up the few forms he needed, grabbed a fresh notepad, and headed back outside. The heat hit him like a wall, but he welcomed it. Real, immediate, undeniable. Olivia was wiping down the hood of a car, her movements careful, almost cautious, like she wasn't sure yet if she was really allowed to breathe easier. Liam hovered near the water hoses, uncertain, watching Ethan with guarded eyes. Ethan crossed the lot, stopping a few feet from them. "You two," he said, voice calm but firm. "Come with me." Neither of them moved right away. Then, slowly, Olivia set down her rag, and Liam dropped the hose, following him back toward the shaded side of the building. They stood in a loose triangle, the sun slipping behind the clouds, softening the brutal light just enough to make the moment feel almost gentle. Ethan leaned back against the wall, arms folded loosely across his chest. "I owe you both an apology," he said. Olivia shook her head immediately, an automatic reflex to wave away kindness she hadn't learned to expect. Liam just shifted awkwardly, glancing down at his scuffed sneakers. "No," Ethan continued, his voice steady. "This isn't about blame. This is about responsibility. Mine." He paused, searching for the right words, not corporate slogans, not rehearsed speeches, but real ones. "I built EcoWash to be different," he said quietly. "A place where people mattered, where effort was seen, where respect wasn't earned by breaking yourself to pieces." He looked straight at Olivia, at the lines etched deep into her face, the strength still lingering behind her tired eyes. "And somewhere along the way," Ethan said, softer now, "I forgot to look close enough." Neither of them spoke. The wind kicked up a swirl of dust at their feet. "I'm not just here to clean up a mess," Ethan said. "I'm here to rebuild this place, the right way." He straightened, slipping the notepad from his back pocket. "Liam," he said, turning to the young man, "I've seen how you step up. How do you protect the people around you when no one's watching? That's leadership." Liam blinked, stunned, a flush creeping up his neck. "I'm promoting you to team lead," Ethan said simply. "Effective today. You'll get a raise, proper training, and the authority to make sure this floor runs the way it should." Liam opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally croaked out, "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Ethan smiled, small but genuine. "I know you won't." He turned then to Olivia, who was still frozen, disbelief written all over her. "And you," he said, voice warming. "You're getting a raise too. A real one." Olivia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hand flew up to her chest, fingers trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have to fight twice as hard just to be treated half as well," Ethan said, the words low and thick with meaning. "And starting now, you won't." A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek before she could stop it. She laughed softly, half embarrassed, half overwhelmed, dabbing quickly at her face with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't think anyone noticed." "I noticed," Ethan said. "And from now on, everyone else will too." The three of them stood there for a long moment, the heat, the dust, the broken-down center pressing in, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like the beginning of something different, something worth fighting for. Olivia wiped her eyes again, straightened her back, and gave Ethan a nod so full of quiet gratitude it nearly knocked the breath out of him. Liam grinned, a real, lopsided, relieved grin, and clapped Olivia lightly on the shoulder. And Ethan, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't built this dream in vain. They still had a long road ahead. Broken systems didn't fix themselves overnight. But today, right here, right now, they had planted something stronger than any paycheck or polished slogan. They had planted trust, and it was already beginning to grow. The afternoon was winding down, the sun slipping lower behind the tangle of distant power lines, casting long, slanting shadows across the cracked concrete. Ethan lingered near the office, watching the lot slowly empty. The energy had shifted, lighter now, freer, but under the relief, something kept tugging at the back of his mind, a feeling he couldn't shake. He needed to understand how deep the rot had spread. How long had it been allowed to fester? Inside the office, he rummaged through the chaos Troy had left behind. Papers scattered across desks, forgotten reports, performance charts covered in angry red pen marks. Then he found it. A battered manila folder was tucked behind the filing cabinet, almost hidden. He flipped it open, scanning quickly. And there it was. A document, wrinkled, half-signed in shaky handwriting, with Olivia's name printed at the top. A so-called performance improvement plan. But it wasn't like any he had ever authorized. The wording was brutal, cold, almost predatory. If Olivia failed to meet an unrealistic quota, 20 full-service washes per hour, she would voluntarily resign, waiving all rights to contest her departure. It was a trap. A quiet, legal noose slipped around the neck of a 60-year-old woman who had given everything she had to a company that promised to protect her. Ethan's stomach twisted. This hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been an accident. This had been deliberate, a way to push out those who couldn't break themselves fast enough to make room for cheaper, younger bodies. His hands tightened around the folder until the edges crumpled. He looked out the office window and spotted Olivia kneeling by a car, gently polishing the side mirror with a tenderness most people reserved for family. She didn't know he had found it. She didn't know how badly she had been betrayed. And somehow, that made it worse. Ethan sat down heavily in the office chair, the old vinyl creaking under his weight. He ran a hand through his hair, breathing hard, forcing the anger to settle into something sharper, more useful. This wasn't just about Troy anymore. It was about a system that had allowed people like him to flourish, unchecked, unchallenged. Ethan knew, in that moment, that fixing Brookstone would take more than firing one bad manager. It would mean rooting out every ugly corner where this kind of quiet cruelty had been allowed to grow. He picked up the phone, thumb hovering over the keypad. Then he stopped. Not yet. Not until he had looked every single person in the eye who had been failed by this place. Not until he had made it clear, not just with promises, but with real change, that they were seen, that they mattered, that they were never going to be invisible again. He tucked the crumpled folder under his arm and walked back outside into the thick golden light, the dust rising around his boots. Olivia didn't notice him at first, lost in her work. But when she finally looked up and met his gaze, she froze. And somehow she seemed to know. Ethan gave her a small nod. Not one of pity, but of promise. A promise that the paper he carried wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of his reckoning. And it wasn't going to be quiet. As the sun sank lower, the air cooling slightly but carrying the heavy scent of wet asphalt and motor oil, Ethan knew he couldn't stop at Olivia's file. It wasn't enough to find one injustice. He needed to know how deep it ran. He made his way back inside, passing the garage where Olivia and Liam were finishing the last few cars of the day. Their movements were easier now, lighter, a small victory he couldn't afford to celebrate yet. The office door creaked open under his hand. Inside, he dug deeper. It didn't take long. Tucked in a locked drawer, under a pile of outdated manuals, he found another set of files, labeled simply, almost innocuously, Exit Interviews. He flipped them open, skimming page after page, and a grim pattern began to emerge. Names he didn't recognize at first, but ages that caught his eye. 58, 61, 56, 64. Over the past 18 months, 6 older employees had voluntarily resigned from Brookstone alone. Each had been here for years, most with spotless records. Each had quietly disappeared after being placed on similar performance plans. No complaints had ever been escalated. No investigations launched, just quiet exits, one after another, their stories buried under paperwork and silence. Ethan leaned against the desk, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest like a stone. This hadn't been Troy acting alone. It was a culture, a practice, a quiet, calculated way of trimming the workforce without ever admitting wrongdoing. They had turned loyalty into liability, experience into a target, and they had counted on no one paying attention. Ethan closed the folder slowly, his jaw tightening. Not anymore. He thought about Olivia, about the way her hands shook when she lifted heavy hoses. He thought about the tired smiles from workers who still showed up every day, even when no one thanked them, even when the system worked against them. He thought about what it meant to build something, and what it meant to let it rot while you looked away. Not on his watch. Not ever again. He gathered the files under his arm, stepping back out into the dying light. Olivia was wiping down a windshield, Liam beside her, both moving slower now, the fatigue of the day catching up to them. But when they saw Ethan, something flickered across their faces. A question, maybe, or a hope too fragile to name. Ethan met their eyes. Steady. Certain. Tomorrow would be different. Not because he said it, because he would make it so. Because people like Olivia deserve better than broken promises. Because dignity wasn't something you earned by working yourself to the bone. It was something you were owed by the simple fact of showing up day after day and giving the best of yourself, even when no one noticed. Especially then. Ethan turned toward the parking lot, the last rays of sunlight cutting long shadows across the ground. Change was coming, and this time, it would be loud enough for everyone to hear. Night had settled gently over Brookstone by the time Ethan pulled the center's battered front doors closed behind him. The lot was empty now, save for a few lingering cars and the soft glow of a single security light buzzing overhead. The day's heat had broken, leaving behind a hush, the kind of quiet that made promises to those willing to listen. Ethan stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. The stillness, the responsibility. Change wouldn't come with grand speeches or a fresh coat of paint. It would come one shift at a time, one broken piece replaced, one person shown they mattered, and it had to start now. Back inside the office, Ethan pulled out his phone, fingers moving fast, punching in numbers without hesitation. "Janet," he said the moment his assistant answered, voice sharp with purpose. "Clear my schedule. Tomorrow, the day after, however long it takes." He could hear her blink across the line, stunned into silence. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked carefully. "No," Ethan said, "but it will be." He spent the next hour combing through employee files, cross-referencing schedules, and scribbling notes. He flagged open positions that had been quietly left vacant, critical roles stretched thin across too few hands. He drafted a list of equipment, hoses frayed to uselessness, Washers past their prime, dryers running half capacity. The tools the crew needed to do their jobs, tools they had been denied. And then, the most important call. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but kind. "Denise Ramirez?" Ethan asked. "Speaking," she said. "This is Ethan Cole. I need a new operations manager at Brookstone," he said without preamble. "I need someone who knows how to lead, someone who listens." There was a beat of silence. Then, "When do you want me there?" "Tomorrow morning," Ethan said. "I'll be there," Denise replied. It was that simple. It had to be. The next day dawned cooler, crisp, a promise stitched into the air. Ethan was waiting at the lot when the first employees trickled in, blinking sleepily, looking confused by his presence but too wary to ask. He greeted each one by name, shaking their hands, looking them in the eye. They deserved to be seen. When Olivia arrived, she hesitated at the entrance, unsure. Ethan crossed the distance first, offering a warm smile. "Good morning, Olivia," he said, as if it had always been normal for the CEO to greet her at the door. She smiled back, tentative, but real. Inside, he called the team together, not in the cramped office, but outside, under the open sky. No podium, no flashy presentation, just a circle of people standing on cracked asphalt, ready to hear the truth. Ethan spoke simply. He acknowledged the mistakes, owned them, made it clear that real changes were already underway, new equipment, new hires, new leadership. But more than that, he made a different kind of promise. Not that things would be perfect, but that they would never be invisible again. That respect wouldn't be a reward for surviving the worst days. It would be the baseline for every day. He didn't sugarcoat the road ahead. It would be hard. It would be slow. It would require every one of them to believe, not just in the company, but in themselves, in each other. But change had already begun, right here, right now. As he spoke, Ethan caught Liam standing a little taller, Olivia nodding slowly, the others leaning in, listening. Hope, fragile but growing, stitched itself into the cracks. And for the first time in a long time, the Brookstone Center didn't feel broken anymore. It felt alive. Ethan looked around the circle of tired, wary, stubborn faces and felt something settle inside him. Not satisfied. Something better. Something stronger. A quiet, unshakable resolve. They weren't just rebuilding a center, they were rebuilding trust. And this time, they were doing it together. The last car rolled out of the Brookstone lot as the evening settled in, painting the sky in long streaks of orange and violet. The machines, once groaning and bitter, now sat silent, almost restful. Ethan stayed long after the others had begun gathering their things, leaning quietly against one of the soap-stained posts near the entrance. He watched them. Liam was talking animatedly with two younger workers, sketching something in the air with his hands. The new hires were filling out paperwork inside the office with Denise, who had already moved through the space like it belonged to her. Olivia, wiping down the last of the drying racks, her movement slower but no longer beaten down by dread. There was still exhaustion etched into their bodies, but woven through it now was something else, resilience, and something dangerously close to pride. When Olivia finally approached, she walked with a slight limp, but her head was higher, her steps steadier. She stopped a few feet away from Ethan, twisting the hem of her shirt in her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia cleared her throat, voice rough with nerves and something deeper. I wanted to say thank you," she said, looking down at the cracked asphalt between them. "Not just for the raise or the shift changes." She looked up then, really looked, and Ethan felt the weight of it hit him squarely in the chest. "For seeing me," she said simply. No speech rehearsed, no corporate slogans, Just 6 words that carried the gravity of everything she had survived. Ethan nodded once, the kind of nod you give when words feel too small. "You were always there," he said softly. "It's about damn time someone was there for you." Her lips quivered in the barest hint of a smile. Behind them, the crew had started laughing about something. A small, bright noise that carried across the lot like a spark catching dry wood. Ethan glanced back, watched as Liam high-fived one of the new hires, as Denise leaned over a clipboard, shaking her head in mock exasperation. The center wasn't perfect yet. It wouldn't be for a long time. There would still be bad days, still broken machines, still moments when the old habits try to creep back in. But tonight was different. Tonight was the night they chose not to be afraid anymore. Ethan turned back to Olivia, offering a hand. She hesitated, then took it, her grip firm, rough from years of hard work, warm in the cooling air. "Thank you," she whispered again, squeezing once before letting go. As she walked back toward the others, Ethan stayed where he was, watching her disappear into the small, laughing crowd. He leaned his head back, staring up at the first stars winking into the darkening sky. For the first time in what felt like years, he didn't feel like he was standing at the top of a company looking down. He felt like he was standing exactly where he needed to be, among them, with them, building something that mattered. Not just another business, not just another success story, something real, something worth staying for, something worth fighting for. And this time, he promised himself he wouldn't ever forget that again. Sometimes the biggest changes don't start with a revolution. They start with one small moment, when someone decides to stand up, when someone refuses to walk past injustice and pretend they didn't see it. Today, Ethan Cole didn't just fix a broken center. He rebuilt something far more important: dignity, trust, and hope, piece by piece, person by person. Because every workplace, every community, every family is made strong not by numbers or profits, but by people who care enough to notice, to act, to lead with courage, not fear. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness, a word, a hand, a second chance, can be enough to change someone's whole world. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that one voice can make a difference, that standing up still matters, then we invite you to be part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful stories about resilience, about courage, about choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard. Because the world doesn't just need more noise, it needs more people willing to stand up and stay. Thank you for watching. And remember, even the smallest act of goodness is never small.